Hello everyone, welcome to Inconvenient Truths. I'm your host, Jennifer Zheng. Following the New York Times' recent series of articles attacking Shenyun Performing Arts and Falun Gong, we highlighted their despicable tactics and sinister intentions in our last two episodes. Today, I will continue to reveal the truth, sharing three insider stories from Falun Gong practitioners' projects. The first insider story I want to talk about happened in Sydney years ago. I was working as a journalist for a Chinese newspaper run by Falun Gong practitioners. Before an election, I interviewed a federal parliament member, and her media assistant was there. Shortly after the interview, her media assistant contacted me. He said he was studying for a master's degree in media at the University of Sydney. He needed to choose an ethnic minority media outlet in Australia to write a paper about the current state of minority media in the country. He told me that my professional level during the interview had left a deep impression on him. Because of that, he decided to choose the newspaper I work for as the subject of his paper. I gladly agreed to his request. He then sent me a list of questions about the newspaper's ownership, shareholders, global organizational structure, and operations, which left me speechless because I couldn't answer any of them. What I knew was that Falun Gong practitioners in the US had started a newspaper and a website, and those in Australia seeing this wanted to do this same. They would contact the US coordinators, get approval, and start in Australia. Local practitioners in Australia handled registration, funding, and operation independently. The US practitioners mainly managed the content and provided some training for newcomers. So even though the US and Australian media might share the same brand and news content, and people might think that they were part of one corporate group, they had no real economic or operational connection, especially in the beginning. The focus was just on keeping the media running, not on shareholders or ownership. Whoever registered the newspaper bore the financial burden like printing and rent. Those without money contributed labor. Thus, it was difficult to say who actually owned the newspaper. Would the New York Times dig for dark secrets here too? What I can say here is that I later redirected that graduate student to study the status of overseas Chinese media, the infiltration by the CCP, and the suppression of independent media like ours. He completed his thesis following my advice and using the extensive reference materials I provided to him. The second insider story was learned when I visited Israel in 2007. I learned there was only one Chinese Falun Gong practitioner there, yet he managed to run a Chinese language edition of the Epoch Times all by himself. How did he do it? He published a weekly paper where he only needed to edit one page of local news. The rest, including world news, China news, culture, sports, entertainment, etc., came directly from the European edition of the Epoch Times. Distribution and advertising were managed by Western Falun Gong practitioners in Israel. These are some photos of Falun Gong practitioners in Israel. At that time, there were tens of thousands of Chinese workers in Israel, and the newspaper was delivered to where they lived. Being the only Chinese newspaper and featuring local news, it was popular among Chinese workers, attracting local business ads. This edition of the Epoch Times in Israel even turned a profit, unlike many other countries where practitioners had to fund the printing costs themselves. Essentially, many Falun Gong projects are run through collective effort, with everyone contributing as they can without concern for personal gain. Later, as media grew, it became more professional with full-time paid staff. But those who initially contributed without compensation never asked for their contribution back. So the New York Times, as an outsider, completely fails to grasp the mechanics and the spirit of a faith-based group. That's why it mistakenly portrays us as ignorant or misguided victims. Or perhaps it does understand how Falun Gong practitioners selflessly contribute their time and effort, but has chosen to distort the facts to serve its sinister purpose. Which one do you think is the case? Are Falun Gong practitioners really fools, easily deceived? Speaking for myself, I have been an outstanding student since elementary school and excelled at Peking University, one of the top universities in China. Due to my academic performance, I was directly admitted into both graduate school and later into a PhD program, exempt from taking the entrance exams that others had to sit for. Only 2 students in my class were granted this honor. Among Falun Gong practitioners, there were many outstanding individuals from various fields. I met a PhD supervisor in a labor camp in Beijing who was also sent there for practicing Falun Gong. The portrayal of us by the New York Times as ignorant zealots is a profound insult to our community and our faith. I hope one day, if the newspaper still exists and acknowledges its mistakes, it will apologize to us. Finally, here's a personal inside story I've never shared before. In 2002, when Jiang Zemin, the former CCP leader responsible for initiating the persecution of Falun Gong, was going to visit the US, many practitioners, including many from Australia, wanted to protest. At that time, I had just escaped from China to Australia alone. My husband and child were still in China. And I was writing my memoir and editing for the Epoch Times in Australia. My refugee application wasn't approved yet, so I couldn't leave, and the newspaper needed people to stay anyway, so I stayed. With many editors gone, the workload was immense. All were volunteers, with some practitioners even paying for printing. And Grace, this lady, who had given me shelter, prepared meals for me for the duration of her absence, filling her fridge with ready-to-eat meals, as she knew how busy I would be. So whenever I was hungry, I just needed to take one box out and reheat the food. I had been working intensely then. Then one day I received a long-distance call from China. The caller told me that as one of the plaintiffs involved in the case against Jiang Zemin at the United Nations for persecuting Falun Gong, the CCP police had gone to my home in Beijing and arrested my husband. They also took away our home computer and a lot of other items. No one even knows where he is being detained. The only thing they know is that the police threatened to sentence him to 10 years in prison. When I heard this news, it was like a bolt from the blue. At that time, my daughter was only 9 years old. What would she do now that her father had been arrested? Although my husband's parents had already retired and had come from their hometown to live with us in Beijing, they could only take care of my daughter's daily needs. Financially, they relied completely on my husband. With him detained, their meager retirement income wasn't even enough to cover the management fee of the apartment my daughter and they lived in. Meanwhile, I didn't have a job or any source of income. How could I possibly support the entire family? After hanging up the phone, I was on the verge of tears. But I immediately told myself, no, I can't cry. I don't have time to cry. I still need to edit the newspaper. I forced back my tears and shut off my thoughts about my husband's arrest. I had to finish editing the newspaper first. We had to send the PDF file to the printing factory before 8 p.m. or the next day's newspaper wouldn't come out on time. Even 1 minute late was unacceptable. Only after sending off the final pages of the newspaper did I write a simple email about my husband's arrest. I sent it to the email group for Falun Gong practitioners in Australia to let them know. A few days later, the practitioners who had been protesting in the United States returned. Grace later told me that when she saw me for the first time after coming back, my face looked terrible. It was only at that point that I finally handed over my editorial work for the Epoch Times to other editors and began focusing all my energy on rescuing my husband. I accepted media interviews, visited members of parliament to seek their help, and more. Because I was just a foreigner waiting for my refugee application to be approved, I couldn't directly meet with MPs on my own. Local Falun Gong practitioners had to bring me to meet with their MPs since I didn't even have the right to approach them myself. I must say that period was one of the hardest times for me since the persecution began. My husband's sister threatened me and urged me to remain silent, warning that if I spoke out, my husband could face severe torture in prison or even got killed. I was forced to make a difficult decision. Should I expose my husband's arrest or stay silent as his sister demanded? It was perhaps the hardest choice I've ever had to make. After much internal struggle, I decided to expose his arrest. And here is one of the media reports from that time. And this is a 4-page feature story of me later when the English version of my book was released. Looking back, I believe I made the right choice. Although the CCP initially threatened my husband with a 10-year prison sentence, he was released just 35 days after his arrest. This experience has taught me that exposing evil is often the better choice and perhaps always the right one. The purpose of sharing these 3 old stories is to show that Shen Yun, the Epoch Times, and other projects by Falun Gong practitioners have grown through immense challenges and dedication. We do this for noble causes, not personal gain. Yet, the New York Times went to such lengths as to sift through thousands of pages of Shen Yun's financial statements in an attempt to discredit us. Ultimately, they reversed the timeline of events to forcefully accuse us, as they could not find any evidence against us. Thus, the New York Times' exhaustive efforts only serve the interests of the CCP and add no value to the public or society. Falun Gong has relied on faith to preserve all these years. Matters within a faith-based group are not resolved with money. If the New York Times focuses solely on financial aspects for analysis, how can they truly understand? Doesn't that make sense? Well, I think I've spoken enough today, so let me stop here. Over all these years, we have many stories to tell, yet we seldom share them. Thanks to the New York Times, I've shared a few today. Okay, thank you for watching. Please like, share this video, and subscribe to my channel, my X account, or visit my website at jenniferzengblog.com to sign up for a membership or make a donation. Your support is vital to enable me to continue sharing the inconvenient truths. Thank you, and see you next time.